Hi, I'm John Mills, and I was a family caregiver for my father who suffered from Parkinson's disease for a decade. He passed away in August of 2007. Being a caregiver was one of the most difficult and one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, and I don't regret it 1 minute of it. My father was diagnosed with Parkinson's at the end of 2000, but in retrospect, it was clear he'd been suffering for the disease for about 3 to 4 years. Parkinson's is very difficult to diagnose because there is no test for it. Many times it is misdiagnosed because the symptoms can represent a number of other diseases. In the first few years of my father's bout with Parkinson's, the medications were able to counteract many of the symptoms. But starting in 2004, he started to get sicker and sicker from it, and the disease really started to take hold. He started to have balance issues and started falling, and so he needed a walker to get around. Then his speech became slurred, and he was unable to communicate very clearly. And this was really frustrating for him because my father had been a real leader in his community. But to his credit, he wanted to continue to lead a full and active life, so he worked around the Parkinson's. He continued to serve on his local community board, and where he was remained an active and important member. He continued to go to sporting events such as baseball and basketball, which were the sports that he loved. It was really cute. He continued to go out on dates and see his longtime girlfriend. And he continued to go to his beloved vacation spot of Avalon, New Jersey, where he'd been going for 50 years. He was also determined to stay in his own house, and I'm very pleased that he was able to stay there throughout his life. It's one of the proudest things I've been able to accomplish, and it wasn't easy. However, all this was incredibly stressful for me as his primary caregiver, particularly as he got sicker. In the last 18 months of his life, he got noticeably weaker. He started to get sick, more and more sick, first with colds and then with pneumonia. Then he started to need more and more assistance to do everyday things like bathing and eating and going to the bathroom. First, he started out receiving about 4 hours of home care a day, but then it grew to 8 and then to 12 hours of home care a day at the time he passed away. He also started falling a lot more often. We got a number of calls in the middle of the night or early morning where he'd fallen and there was no one there to help him, and where he pushed his life alert button and they took him to the emergency room. In the end, my father passed away in his beloved vacation spot of Avalon, New Jersey. Ironically, he passed away about 6 weeks after his longtime girlfriend died. He was also really determined to get down to Avalon, New Jersey, and I'm convinced that he knew the end was near and that was where he wanted to die. And I'm really glad that was where he passed away. There was something very fitting about it. As part of the You'll Be Okay video campaign, I'm going to share some tips that I learned as a family caregiver. Number one, it's important to help your loved one live as full a life as possible. I probably took this a bit too far because I accommodated my father almost too much, and I gave in to almost all of his wishes because I had a lot of guilt. I knew the end was near, and I wanted him to be able to live a full and productive life. It was tremendously stressful for me at the time. It caused strife in my marriage. It also just put a ton of pressure on me. But in retrospect, I'm really glad that I did it because my father was able to really enjoy the last few years of his life, and I was really glad that I was able to make that happen for him. My second tip is be prepared. I am fortunate that my father was very prepared. Right after he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, he got a living will, a healthcare proxy, and a financial proxy. So all of his important legal documents were in place. We also had a discussion about what his wishes were. This is really important because many times when people get towards the end, they can't communicate for themselves. This was true with my father. He had a stroke, and so I knew what his wishes were. I know this is a very tough conversation to have, but I recommend that you talk with your loved one about what their wishes are, so you're not in a situation where You don't know what they want, and you're being forced to make decisions that you're not sure if they'd be happy with. One other thought on this: it's important that you respect their decision, whatever it may be. It's their life, not yours. And so, whatever they tell you, make sure you fulfill it. Finally, this is very cliche, but take care of yourself. I was a male caregiver, which is definitely the minority. There are only about 30% of caregivers who are men. And I think there's this thought that men are tough and they grit through it. But you know what? We have emotional needs too, and it takes out a lot of stress on us. So it's really important that you take care of yourself, even though it sounds like a cliche. As a caregiver, you have a tendency to ignore your own well being. I have one word for you: don't. If you can exercise, that's great. I know that's really hard to do because you have so little time when you're a caregiver. So even if you can't do something like exercise regularly, take an hour, grab a cup of coffee outside of the house, collect your thoughts, read the newspaper, whatever relaxes you. It's important for both you and your caregiver, you and the person you're caring for. I just want to say my experience as a caregiver has become a calling and has resulted in my creating eCareDiary.com, a website to help caregivers manage this very difficult time. Being a caregiver has redirected my life for ways that I never thought and never imagined, and has really made my life much more fulfilling. I have never regretted one day of it. Thank you.